Welcome everyone to this week's Ask the Experts workshop. I am Dr. Pamela Hurstella Pietra, founder and president of Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, and host of this popular weekly series. Thank you for being here today, and thank you in advance to our terrific panelists. As many of you know, Children and Screens is one of the nation's leading nonprofit organizations that focuses on digital media's physical, psychosocial, emotional, behavioral, and physical impacts on toddlers, children, and adolescents. We partner with researchers, clinicians, public health professionals, educators, parents, and more to advance the science around digital media and child health, educate the public and policymakers, inform clinical practice, and improve the lives of young people and their families. Along with a commitment to support research into the impacts of the increased digital media use during the pandemic, we are helping families by hosting these weekly webinars to feature interdisciplinary experts discussing the topics and questions on all of our minds in the midst of COVID-19. Today, we are focusing on something we all need, and many of us don't get enough of: sleep. During the pandemic, family sleep habits have changed dramatically. If your kids are rolling out of bed after noon and you are worried about how they'll function during the school year because the sleep schedules are out of whack, our experts are here to acknowledge your concerns and provide you with tools to improve the sleep of everyone in your household. Our panelists have reviewed the questions you submitted and will answer as many as they can. Some of you were notified prior to the workshop that you may be called upon to answer your questions live on camera. If Dr. Seisler calls your name, you will be temporarily authorized to start your camera and audio. Please do so, tell us who you are, and ask your question. If you have additional questions during the workshop, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If your question is selected for the panel, we will reply in the Q&A box and then invite you to ask your question live on camera. We are recording today's workshop and hope to upload a video onto YouTube in the coming days. You'll receive a link to our YouTube channel tomorrow, where you can find videos from our past webinars on our YouTube channel as well. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Charles Seisler. One of the world's foremost authorities on sleep and sleep research, Dr. Seisler is the director of the Division of Sleep Medicine at Harvard Medical School and the chief and senior physician in the Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders in the Departments of Medicine and Neurology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Seisler has spent over 40 years researching human sleep and the physiology of the human circadian clock, and has been a friend and trusted advisor to Children and Screens for many years. Welcome, Chuck.
Welcome to Sleep and Screens during COVID-19. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rebecca Robbins. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, where her research uses marketing and communication and novel tools and technologies like smartphones and other mobile devices to design persuasive behavioral change interventions to improve population sleep health. It's a pleasure to have you here, Rebecca, to join this panel. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's great to be here. So we thought we would start out the session by doing a quick assessment of your knowledge when it comes to sleep and kids and teens as well. So I'm going to put up a couple slides, and we're also going to do this in an interactive way via Zoom. So my colleague will put up some questions for you all to answer. So are these true or false, these statements that you're seeing on the screen? Number one, heavy or loud snoring from my child means that they are sleeping deeply. Is that true or is that false? Number two, experiencing a night terror is a traumatic event for my child. True or is that false? Number three, if I move my child's bedtime later, they will wake up later. True or false? Number four, melatonin is safe for my child because it is natural. True or false? And number five, kids who are good sleepers sleep through the night. True or false? Now we're scrolling on to a section about your overall knowledge about sleep and teenagers. So with that in mind, number 6, technology, the statement, technology is the main reason that teenagers can't go to sleep at a reasonable time. Is that true or is that false? Number 7, if schools start later, teens will just stay up later. Is that true or false? Number 8, we are cuddling our teens by letting them sleep in. Is that true or is that false, that statement? Number 9, teens who fall asleep in class are lazy. Is that true or false? And finally, number 10, teenagers have little control over their sleep. Is that statement true in your opinion or is that false? So we'll leave these up here for just another moment and we will reveal the answers at the end of the presentation. So make sure to stay awake and take good notes. All right, I'll pass it off now to the next panelist. And will we keep this poll up perhaps so others can respond, or Gabriella, I'll let you handle. Oh, terrific. My colleague is saying yes, we will leave the poll up. So if you're just joining the discussion now, please feel free to head over to that poll and take our quiz on kids, sleep, and teens. And I'll pass it over to the next presenter. Back to you, Chuck.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for that, for providing that quiz. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Kim West. Kim is a licensed clinical social worker who has been practicing child and family therapist for more than 21 years and the creator of the Sleep Lady Shuffle, a gentle and proven method to get a good night's sleep for you and your child. She is the author of the Sleep Lady's Good Night Sleep Tight and a series of accompanying workbooks. It's a great pleasure to have you here join our panel, Kim, and I look forward to hearing from you.
All right, I had to unmute myself there. Welcome everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about practical tips for parents on how to promote healthy sleep while managing screen time for your children ages 0 to 6. So my colleague, let me see here, get my slide to change. My colleague, Lauren Hale, who's going to be speaking in this webinar today, has done some research using about the use of media and sleep. And she summarizes the effects of parents and kids using lit screens at bedtime close to their face as having the following effects: delayed bedtimes, which all of us are seeing during COVID too, taking longer to get to sleep, which means increased battles between parent and child at bedtime. The sleep quality is reduced and the total sleep time is decreased. So that means there's a lot of tired parents and children out there. And as you know, sleep is critical to our immune system, to our mental health, and to our children's learning. So this is why we really want to start to create soothing bedtime routines without screens. I've also found in my practice of 25 years that there are a lot of adults who use TVs and tablets as a negative sleep association. In other words, something they need to go to sleep and help them get back to sleep. And those same parents will sometimes then use a TV or a screen for their children to go to sleep and back to sleep, and thereby creating that same negative sleep association for them. So if your child has a TV in their bed, I would absolutely recommend you to remove the TV, and if you're willing, remove the TV from your own bedroom and share with your child that you want them to learn how to put themselves to sleep without the TV, and that you're going to learn along with them. So that will also mean, of course, tablets. There's another interesting study that supports the importance of benefits of a screen-free bedtime that Douglas Teedy, a professor of psychology and human development at Penn State, did, where he found that parents' emotional availability at bedtime promotes feelings of safety and security, and as a result, better regulated sleep. So you may say, well, how do I become more emotionally available to my child? What does that really mean? So here I've listed a few things that I think are really doable. And the first one is just to not bring your phone or a tablet into your children's room. Really give your child that focused attention for 20 or so minutes. You could ask them if they want to read a book or play a puzzle or have some quiet activity. Maybe let them choose the book. And then one of my favorite memories with my children is have fun reading the book. Animate the characters, point out the pictures, really help them connect it with real life. And then of course, have as much loving touch during your bedtime routine. Kisses and hugs and just, caresses are really soothing and comforting to our children. You could even point out something that they've learned during the day or something that they did well or something that they want to share with you. And then of course you can also do some yoga poses. Again, you see how this is relaxing to you, the parent, and the child. And you may know this, but I'm a big proponent of reading to your children at bed. And I really want you to try to embrace the calming power of reading, particularly picture books and storytelling. So I want to just share with you 2 findings in research. And one is that they've found that research shows that the good old-fashioned picture books, even those that maybe you and your child have memorized, are great ways to not only develop the brain, but also are great for bonding and soothing, especially at bedtime. So your baby's not only learning some of the elements of reading, like turning the pages and distinguishing words, but by reading picture books, you're also helping that neural connection and their ability to eventually learn to read all by themselves. And this engagement that you have with your child while you're reading a picture book fosters that closeness and that interaction that helps with security, bedtime cues, and healthy sleep routines. And we all need more of a sense of security now in these difficult times. So picture books is a simple thing that you can implement and put into your bedtime routine. There's another interesting study that Dr. Gerard did. She helped people in Kauai after the Hurricane Iniki, and she was trying to help them with their perspective and gain a sense of safety. And she found when she studied these adults and asked them what were their fondest memories of their childhood, it was resoundingly having a parent or a loved one read them a picture book or tell them a story, and that had stayed with them their whole lives. By the way, after I read that, I went and asked my own grown children if they agreed with that, and they said they did, and they went on to telling great stories and memories they had of some of the picture books that we would read together. So it's just another reminder that reading books and telling stories can be a real calming activity that can make your baby feel comforted and reassured. So that old adage of, kids thrive on routine is never been truer than it is right now. So another tip I'd like to share with you is to create a screen use schedule. So remember, habits are formed during the preschool years, so this is a great time to start those rituals and routines and habits. So here's a list of some places that you can start. So 1 to 2 hours of screen time a day total. Actually, there's some research that suggests 1 hour maximum of screen time for children until they're 10 years of age. And then no screens 1 hour before bed. Remember, screens are even background TV, phone, tablet, and of course a television. And age-appropriate content. This is helpful to remember because our children cannot regulate as easily as we can. They can't watch an action movie with violence and just shut it off and walk away and be able to go to sleep quickly. So be careful of what they're watching. And then I would suggest that you create screen-free rules in your family as a whole and that everybody practices them. Some of the common ones are no screens at the TV table. I understand that back in the pre-COVID days when we would go to a restaurant that sometimes we'd give our kids screens to entertain them in the restaurant, but at least try to have this rule at home. And then you yourself also not using the phone as an alarm clock. So a fourth tip is to prepare for a back to school schedule. So you may say to yourself, well, my children are too young, or they're going back to school virtually. I still would encourage you to go back to a routine where you have a set or regular bedtime and a regular wake up time. Remember, routines help us all feel calmer and more reassured. And I realize that all of our schedules have gotten off because of COVID. And so you may be wondering, where in the world am I going to start? My 2-year-old has been going to bed at 10 o'clock and sleeping in, or maybe not sleeping in, and being even more sleep deprived. So I wanted to go over with you how I like to figure out what your child's ideal bedtime is and how to get there. So this is a chart that the source is from the American Academy of Pediatrics with the average sleep times. Now remember, these are just averages, but I like to say that children shouldn't be off these averages by more than an hour total. So let's say, even though these have some pretty big ranges, let's say your 2-year-old needs on average 11 hours of sleep at night and 2 hours during the day, which I have found in my practice to be pretty spot on. And you had in your old schedule a time where your 2-year-old had to get up at 7 a.m., but now they're going to bed really late. So let's go back to that goal of, we want your child getting up at 7 a.m. That means they would have to be asleep by 8 p.m. in order to get those 11 hours at night. So that means you should start your soothing bedtime routine by probably 7:15, 7:30. You give your child that time. So you could say to me, all right, Kim, well, I love the old fashioned, or the old 8 o'clock bedtime, but how am I going to get there? We've been going to bed at, 9, 10, 10:30 sometimes. So that's where I tell you to do what I call the math backwards. So figure out if your 2-year-old needs 11 hours of sleep at night, this last column, and they have to get up at 7, they need to be asleep by 8. So in order to have them be tired enough to go to sleep at 8, you need to start waking them up earlier. So we always start by regulating the wake up. So if they've been sleeping till 8, 8:30, I would start waking them up at 7:30 for a few days, and then finally get to 7 a.m., which will help you to slowly move the bedtime earlier at the same time. So my final tip is that when you wake them up early at 7 a.m. and it's a sunny day, I would suggest that you get outside, even if it's just to sit on your front porch while you're having a cup of coffee and see how many birds you could find, just to get that light exposure, which helps set that internal clock. And remember, having a schedule and that calming routine will help your child feel reassured and will bring back that sense of ritual, routine, and predictability that we're all looking for at this time. So I hope these tips are helpful and that you can find at least one that you can implement into your family life and your bedtime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your vast knowledge on this topic. I would encourage those who are attending today, if you have any questions for Kim or any of the panelists, please use the chat function where you can ask a question. There's a question and answer function where you can ask a question, and please indicate whether or not you wish to ask the question live on camera or you want me to read the question for you. Okay, we have a question that has come in. It is a question for Kim, and it is, what time should I cut out screen time during the day for a 2-year-old? Like how many hours before bedtime? Kim, can you please address that question that has come in?
Yes, so that's a great question. So I would say at least an hour. So if bedtime, if we use the example like I talked about, your 2-year-old needs to wake up at 7, they need 11 hours of sleep, they have to be asleep by 8, and you're going to start your bedtime routine at 7:30, I would say stop screen time by 6:30.
Okay, thank you very much. And now another question, how important are naps for a child between 4 and 5 years old?
Actually, the average age to drop naps is 4 years of age. There are some children that do need a nap in the afternoon, but most do not after the age of 4.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. And can you touch on how screen time and sleep impact each other, specifically in kids newborns to 3 years of age in that population?
Yes, it's like my colleague Lauren Hale talked about, that it creates delayed bedtimes. It takes longer for the child to get to sleep, meaning more battles with the parents. The quality of sleep is reduced, and the length of time a total sleep is decreased, both for the parent and the child. So tired children.
All right. Now, how do you calculate hours of sleep for a child that is waking up multiple times throughout the night? This is from a parent who says her child goes to sleep without a fight, but is waking up so often that she ends up sleeping until 10 or 11 a.m., even though she goes to sleep about 9 or 9:30 p.m.
And she doesn't say how old the child is?
She's 8.
8. I would still work on regulating the wake up, kind of like I talked about in terms of figuring out the ideal bedtime. And then so that there can be enough sleep pressure built up, so that and the bedtime, and then work on, is there any negative sleep association that needs to be addressed at bedtime? For instance, are you lying down with your child to get them to go to sleep? And therefore, when they wake during the night, they need you to lay back down with them. And of course, ruling out any underlying medical condition that could be causing your child to wake frequently during the night.
Okay, great. Now here's another question. The question is, I usually have to wake my 6-year-old in the night so she doesn't wet the bed. Any suggestions to avoid bedwetting and have the whole night's sleep?
Yeah, so bedwetting, there can be multiple causes. One could be family history. And so you'd want to ask, the parents, is there any family history of difficulty staying dry at night? Because usually you'll find that if one of the parents had difficulty and it wasn't until 8 years of age, as an example, that's when the child will. So you'd want to talk to your pediatrician about that. The other one can be, of course, emotional causes. And the third one can be obstructive sleep apnea, often caused by enlarged tonsils and adenoids. Again, I would go back to the pediatrician because waking them before, for instance, due to go to bed to bring them to the bathroom doesn't always solve the trick or solve the problem. And then a final thing you can do is, well, that would be more like, I think I'll just stick with that. I would encourage you to go back to the pediatrician because to see if there's any family history and to rule out obstructive sleep apnea.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Here's another question. and if the attendees could please indicate whether you want to ask the question on camera, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I'll just read them. Here's the next general question. We are having great calming bedtimes, but our daughter is starting to get more upset as we go to leave the room. God, we've all experienced that. Mm-hmm. Any tips for dealing with that negotiation? And then the parent says, or manipulation at times.
Mm-hmm. I really think that we have to change some of our association with bedtime with our children, and that's why it's so wonderful to have a bedtime routine in their room, shade down, and not a rushing through to get to the lights out, but really have a dedicated time. That's some of that emotional availability that Dr. Teavee is talking about, where we're really focused on our child, because lots of times, not always, but lots of times, some of the battle is about that. not that them wanting more attention from you and wanting more connection before the big separation of sleep. So I think building in more time and screen-free time and also more emotional availability at bedtime really can help.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on. Thank you very much, Kim. We have more questions flooding in, but I think we're going to save them for later if we have time, because we need to move on to the next panelist. The next panelist is Wendy Troxell. Dr. Troxell is a senior behavioral and social scientist at the RAND Corporation and an adjunct faculty member in psychiatry and psychology at the University of Pittsburgh. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and certified behavioral medicine sleep specialist. Dr. Troxell is internationally recognized for her work on sleep in couples, how sleep affects health and the global economy, and how social environments, including public policy, affect sleep. Dr. Troxell, it's a pleasure to have you today. We look forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much. Let me just make sure I'm not muted. Yes, I'm good. Great. So we're going to fast forward a bit in the age spectrum to move from little ones that Kim so nicely spoke about, and now fast forward towards our teenagers' sleep and the challenges that they face. And before I dive in, I want to just do a little exercise for everybody to kind of wake everybody up. I'm used to doing these presentations in person, so miss you all. I hope everybody is enjoying virtually. So let's just imagine we're in a room together and this is interactive. So in a second, I'm going to show you some pictures of sort of your typical American families eating breakfast. And I want you to take a moment just to look at those pictures and reflect on, and maybe even call out through the chat box, and I'll try to see them if I can. What about these pictures looks like your typical American family, even your family? And what about those pictures doesn't quite measure up to reality? Okay, is everybody ready? Here we go. Just a typical morning in your average family. What do people think? I don't know how many people in the audience are parents of teenagers. I happen to have two of my own. And I can tell you that this looks, in fact, nothing like our families in the morning. I'm going to try to see if I can see some comments. Here we go. Some people are laughing. I'm going to start reading some of these comments, which are pretty much spot on. Definitely not mine. My kids have their phones. Nope, rarely looks like this. Unreasonable. Everyone is smiling, right? They're all far too happy. And they're also sitting down together. Yeah, so I'm glad that it's not just me who thinks that this is far from reality. I mean, the very idea that we would all be sitting down together with, the morning light, shining through. This is certainly not true during the typical school year. And everybody's just so darn happy. So I'm going to give a disclaimer about this talk. The truth of the matter is nothing I'm going to say today is actually going to magically turn any one of you or your teenagers in particular into any of these happy morning people. And as I'll discuss, actually the likelihood of your teenagers being one of these happy morning people during this specific stage of their development is very unlikely. However, I am going to try to give you some tips to support your teenagers' sleep and also your sleep as well, and maybe decrease some of those battles with our teens. So I'll cover some of the basics very briefly about why sleep is important, particularly for teenagers, why it's so difficult for our teens to get the sleep they need, and particularly during a pandemic. And then I'll give some tips on how both parents and communities can support healthy teen sleep. So very briefly, and Kim touched on this at the earlier age spectrum already, but let me just say that our sleep needs do change throughout the lifespan, with infants and younger children needing the most amount of sleep, and adults typically needing somewhere around 7 to 9 hours. People often think about teenagers, though, as these like little adults, but I'm here to tell you that they're not. their brains and bodies are still dramatically developing and rapidly developing. And during periods of rapid development, human beings need more sleep. So teenagers need less sleep than younger children, but they do need more sleep than adults. So on average, teenagers, the recommendation by scientific consensus is that teenagers should get about 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. Unfortunately, we live in a culture where there are many of us who are simply not sleeping enough. About 2 out of 3 adults regularly achieves the optimal sleep duration for their age group, again, the 7 to 9 hour range. But among teenagers, the situation is much more dire. Only about 1 in 10 teens regularly achieves the optimal 9.25 hours of sleep per night that their developing brains and bodies need to function optimally. And here's where we get to why sleep is so important. And when we sacrifice sleep, and when we allow our teens particularly to sacrifice sleep, why there are really profound consequences. So you can think about sleep as fuel for the brain. And given that, learning and going to school and becoming educated is one of the primary tasks of the adolescent years, it's really important to see the connections between healthy sleep and how it promotes our alertness, our memory consolidation, and our ability to learn. Again, critical tasks of an adolescent learner. Sleep is also a biological necessity, and when we sacrifice it, it will affect our performance and even our safety. We see this in car crash rates caused by drowsy drivers, teenagers being one of the most high-risk populations for drowsy driving crashes. Sleep is also essential for both brain and body and social emotional development. And this is where I'm super passionate. Again, having 2 teenagers of my own, I can see this. And I know as a scientist that the teenage years are a period of dramatic change when we're really shaping behaviors that can last a lifetime, and our brains are also still developing. And finally, sleep is absolutely vital to both our mental and physical health, and particularly during these scary times we're in now with the threat of coronavirus. It bears a reminder that sleep, as Kim also mentioned, is also critical for healthy immune functioning. So we all can do better to protect the sleep and try to promote healthy sleep in our families, including in our teenagers. So I mentioned that teenagers are a really high-risk group for getting insufficient sleep. So why is that? There are actually lots of reasons, some of which are in our control and some of which are out of our control. Here are some of the factors that we actually can control. And as families, we really want to start curbing some of these factors that do negatively influence our teens' ability to get adequate sleep. So there are, of course, the increasing social and academic demands that we see when our kids enter middle school and high school. Apropos of the seminar today, we know that the increasingly excessive use of technology and social media, that many of our teens are absolutely addicted to, is also contributing to teen sleep loss. And of course, there's also the Bainty Frappuccinos and Monster energy drinks and all these other highly caffeinated and sugary drinks that many teens are using in part as a compensatory strategy to deal with their sleep deprivation. But unfortunately, it can create this vicious cycle with poor sleep leading to increased consumption of caffeine. Caffeine, we know, is a powerful disruptor of sleep, which can further exacerbate sleep problems. And so the cycle continues. So these are actually factors that to some extent we can control, and I really do encourage families to put a concerted effort into trying to curb some of these modifiable factors. But there's one factor that we can't really control, and that's teens' sleep-wake biology and how it's actually in conflict with early school schedules, at least during the normal school year. We'll see what happens this year. So during the adolescent years specifically, teenagers see a delay in their biological clocks, which govern our sleep-wake rhythms. Specifically during the teenage years, teenagers are biologically predisposed to stay awake later and sleep in later. So they're not actually just lazy. This is part of their biology. And right at the time that we see this biological shift in their sleep-wake patterns, we have school times that are starting earlier and earlier. So the struggle is real and teens are caught in the middle. And that's one of the major factors that's been identified by substantial research showing why teens are so sleep deprived. So I now want to shift a little bit to talk about what's going on right now. And in the milieu of all those factors that are kind of already exacerbating teens' sleep and making it difficult for them to get the sleep that they need, now we're in a pandemic and lots of things have happened that are making sleep for all of us much more challenging. And teenagers in particular are very vulnerable for a number of reasons. So first, there's the increased stress and anxiety that many of us are feeling. Teenagers pick up their parents' feelings. Teenagers, they're like, pretty aware human beings. They're picking up all sorts of content about, fearful things in social media and through their friends. And again, also picking it up from, seeing how their parents are also stressed. The stress and anxiety can increase the risk for sleep disturbance. As Kim mentioned, teenagers too, they're not just mini adults. And by the way, adults too function better on regular, consistent routines. But with the removal of normal school schedules, with the significant reduction in sort of teens' normal, sports practices, band practice, all these things that help to set a daily routine. All of this in many situations has been either removed or significantly reduced. And teens, just like younger children, adults as well, we function better, our sleep is better when we have sort of predictable and consistent routines. So this is something that parents really, unfortunately, need to take a more active role in now when we don't have those normal external factors that are guiding routines at this moment. And then finally, another factor that is really salient during the pandemic is what we're seeing is an increase in social isolation and loneliness. One of the really unique characteristics of the teenage years, one of the reasons why I find teenagers so fascinating, is that, we're all social beings as human beings, but teenagers in particularly are very much dependent on their social connections, particularly their peer relationships. And this is, again, part of this natural stage of development. And so the stay-at-home orders that many of us have been facing and just the significant social disruptions do have a profound impact on teens' social well-being and their mental health, which can exacerbate sleep problems for many. So what can you do about it? I want to give just a few tips on how to support your teen's sleep, but to be honest, these can also support your own sleep as well. So as mentioned, setting a consistent sleep schedule and probably being more effortful about it in these days is really important. With teens, one of the biggest problems, particularly once school starts, if it starts at a normal sort of schedule, is that you're going to see these vastly flip-flopping schedules for teenagers during the weekday when they have to wake up excessively early, and on the weekends when they shift back to their natural rhythms, which prefer later bedtimes and later wake times. And this flip-flopping schedule and very erratic sleep routines can make it very difficult to get healthy sleep throughout the week. And there are also some consequences of dramatically shifting sleep-wake schedules. It's sort of like being on jet lag all the time. If you felt that, it's not a comfortable position. So my recommendation, and again, this is as both a sleep scientist and a parent of 2 teenagers myself, so I try to find a middle ground here. Try to keep your teenagers' sleep-wake schedules within about a 2-hour window of what they have to do during the week, so you don't have these vastly shifting schedules. And as Kim said, start this process early. Do not wait till the night before school starts. If it's starting even in a virtual sense, don't do it the night before to try to get them on a sleep-wake schedule. Try to back it up at least 2 weeks before the school year starts. This is going to be a consistent theme throughout this webinar. Make bedrooms, technology and social media free zones. As Lauren will discuss next, there's not only sort of the direct effects of the light exposure from technology that can disrupt teens' sleep, but it's also the content. Just think about what you were like when you were a teenager, and if we had access to these little devices that told us all the gossip, much of which is happening, after parents go to bed, between the hours of 10 and 2 a.m. Just reading that content, oh, who's breaking up with who's in a fight. This is all very socially stimulating and can disrupt sleep. So that's why bedrooms should be media-free and technology-free zones. Have some wind down time for your teen before sleep, ideally without technology. Again, the need for wind down does not stop when our children become teenagers. We all can use a healthy, relaxing wind down without technology. And teenagers, again, this is a time when they're learning healthy habits that could really set the stage for adulthood. So you helping them and modeling for them a wind down routine before bedtime instead of just racing off to bed is really setting the stage for healthy living into adulthood. Get physical. Teenagers, all of us need physical activity, and this has been really, I think, a challenge for many during the pandemic. Physical activity itself is good for our sleep, and also ideally, outside physical activity has profound benefits for our mental health, our physical health, and our sleep, because sunlight exposure during the day is a really powerful cue to set our internal biological rhythms. And with that, I want to conclude, so there's enough time for questions and for my fellow presenters. But I want to just recognize for parents who are out there and maybe struggling and feel that this is a constant battle, that yes, it is a struggle, and teen sleep problems are real, and some of this may seem insurmountable, but there are small steps that every parent, every family can take to make incremental changes that can make a big difference in our teenagers' lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. I really appreciate your presentation. Our first question is coming from Francesca Bignami. Francesca, thank you so much for joining us, and please feel free to ask your question.
Okay, well, thanks so much for those presentations. And I think I'm a mother of a 7-year-old, so he kind of falls right in between the two age groups you were just talking about. And he's always been a night owl. And the pandemic has made it that much more difficult, because even though we can control his screen time no problem, and we can do the same routines no problem, because we live in a densely populated urban environment where we don't have a yard and we don't have easy access to parks either, because they were shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. And now with the heat, it's really hard to get out there. I was wondering if you have tips for how I get him into that schedule, because also if I wake him up in the morning at the prescribed times, I have to be with him the whole time, because otherwise he'll just go back to bed, or he'll ask for screen time, that kind of thing. And of course I can't do that because I'm a working parent. So I can't leave him to his own devices after I try to get him into that normal schedule. And so any tips would be very, very welcome.
Yes, well, thanks so much, Francesca, for your question and asking it live. And I just want to start by saying I feel for you, and I think that's really challenging. The stay-at-home orders have been challenging for everybody, but particularly those, I think, who live in densely populated areas, who haven't had the access to sort of the relief and the escape of being outside. That's really challenging. And you're right that so much indoor time combined with lack of a normal schedule can really be disruptive to a child's sleep. And you mentioned that your child is sort of a natural night owl. And that's a good point, that even we see this developmental shift for most kids when they become teenagers, that kind of all of them for the teenage years, the majority of them do become, at least temporarily, these night owls. But there are there are also individual differences that are in large part genetically driven, where some people are just naturally, even your 7-year-old, more night owls than morning people. So briefly, I would say there's a couple things that I would suggest with your son. Number one, try to do smaller increments of shifts rather than really big ones. It's sort of like adjusting to jet lag. And, you know, as much as you may have sort of an ideal goal in mind for him, of like when you want him to be waking up and going to bed, you know, our bodies and our brains have a really hard time doing massive shifts, and that's why jet lag is hard. So even if you could do over successive nights, trying to back your child's bedtime and wake up time up by 15 minutes, it'll be a little bit more gradual for him. I'm hoping in terms of, you know, kind of where we are in the pandemic, that you're now more able to get him outside. And I realize that you may be limited with your availability too. And that's just, believe me, a struggle that many working parents are having. But, you know, to the extent you can, you know, even a brief walk outside in the morning, you know, to kind of get that first burst of morning light. Morning light exposure is sort of one of the most important cues to set our internal biological clocks. So I would really focus on that. Even if you had to set, I see a window in your background, I see the sun shining through, that's a lot of light exposure. So getting him, you know, even if he's doing homework or reading or doing something that maybe you can sort of monitor, put him by the window at least so he's getting some of that morning light exposure, which can help to shift his rhythms as well. And by the same token, watch how much light he's being exposed to in the evening, because light in the evening will shift his rhythms back. And to the extent possible, try to have some physical activity, whether it be a walk or running around outside, getting him on his bike, if it's safe in your community. And if not, there are a gazillion online free apps now that, you know, maybe you could try, you know, some sort of exercise even in the home, just because physical activity to kind of spend some of that energy, particularly for a 7-year-old, is so important.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And thank you so much for joining us. Our next question, which was asked, you know, in the pre-question period, is: my son is 16. He'll be 17 in October. Since school officially ended in June, he's wanted to stay up late playing video games until 3 a.m. When he's not playing video games, he's on his iPad watching YouTube or Netflix. During the week, I make him turn in by midnight, but on the weekends, I let him stay up as he wants, which is usually until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I know he doesn't have anything to do right now that he needs to do in order to get up early for, but it doesn't seem healthy for him to keep those hours. What is your advice? What is too much screen time?
Yeah, well, it's, I think Lauren is going to talk more about what is too much screen time. So let me just focus on sort of the shifting sleep-wake schedule that you're talking about. And with a 15 and a 17-year-old in my own home, believe me, I speak from experience and I see this happening. And it is really hard as parents because there is a lot of time for these kids to now fill. I mean, with all the normal things that make their schedule so busy, you know, virtually vanished overnight for many of us. And I'm glad you're asking this question now, because assuming your teenager is going back to some level of school, whether in person or virtual, the sooner you can start reining in that schedule, the better. The natural tendency with teenagers is going to be to drift later and later, because that's their that's sort of what they're predisposed to do during the teenage years. They're naturally night owls. And so that's what you're seeing when you see your teenager, when left to his own devices, on the weekend, he's staying up to 3 a.m. I would really start to try to rein that in and putting some limits on the technology use, particularly at bedtime. So if he's gaming in the bedroom, you know, I hate to say it, but one of the best things you can do is take the technology out of the bedroom. Video gaming, particularly at night, is really disruptive to sleep. Teenagers still have trouble, you know, sort of regulating and reining themselves in. And, you know, video games are designed to be addictive. And so if it's in his room, he's just going to, and, you know, he's also got this, you know, natural tendency to stay up later, much more so than we do as adults. So, that tendency to shift later and later is going to keep on happening when he has the reinforcement of being able to game in his bedroom. So get the gaming out of the bedroom. I would start reining in the weekend schedule as well as the weekday schedule to bring those more in line. And yes, having a wake up time, even if it seems like there's nothing to do during the day, that's really important, because it's an important reminder for our kids that there is something to wake up for. And you might have to be kind of creative and effortful in helping your teenager even to kind of have some goals during the day. My own teens thought I was completely crazy, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I kid you not, I had star charts for my 15 and 17-year-old, which they were not happy about at all. But on that star chart, I had some few basic things that I wanted to make sure that they were doing every day to support their mental and physical health. That included reading every day, that included doing something outside every day, doing something physically active, and then doing a chore around the house. All of these things are important for being good human beings and keeping the mind and the body healthy. And I gave them the choice. I will keep the star chart going as long as, if you're not doing it on your own. As soon as you show me that you can regulate and do these behaviors on your own, I'll take away the, demeaning star chart, which made them feel like school-age children again. But believe me, it motivated them.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. We have a couple of more great questions here. What time should I cut out screen time during the day for a 2-year-old? Like how many hours before? I'm sorry, Wendy. That was a question that was asked before. How do I create interest in anything else? Our kids beg for screens and sulk about all else. We hide screens regularly.
Yes.
What do they do? What do they do, Wendy?
Yes, and I think Lauren will touch on some of this as well, but very briefly, you're not alone. I think being creative about, like I have mentioned before, for some families, I not only recommend that everybody gets technology out of the bedroom at least an hour before bedtime, have a central place where your phones, tablets, et cetera, can recharge as you recharge and get a good night of healthy sleep. But you might have to be creative, because these, kids and teenagers are sneaky and very smart, and they, even, have it under lock and key if necessary. Get creative, because it's that important to, make sure that technology is not disrupting your teen's sleep. In terms of encouraging other behaviors, model other behaviors. And yeah, sometimes our kids and our teenagers need a little bit of scaffolding, we call it, a little showing of like, okay, well, if they don't naturally think, oh, I want to go ride a bike, well, suggest that you'll go on a bike ride with them or reading a book with them. Show them that you do other activities other than constantly look at your phone. And that can be a good way to reinforce other behaviors other than the constant screen use.
Great. Here's another question. I'm struggling with my parenting role of my 24-year-old who has temporarily had to move back home during the pandemic. He has regressed to bad sleep habits and wants to go to sleep at 3 a.m. and get up at 1 p.m. That doesn't work for my sleep habits, so we are back to arguing. Help. So now here's a little bit of an older kid who's moved back home.
Yeah, this is such a disruptive time we're living through, and these normal life transitions that we all expected, with their child launching and, going off into the world. Many families are having their, 24-year-old is basically a very late adolescent. The adolescent years do span, and, you probably thought that, your child was launched, and now because of the pandemic, your child's back, and that can be, battles can ensue because, he's a, young adult at least, or a late adolescent, but this is your home. So setting some rules about what's okay in your home is critically important. And laying some groundwork down during the daytime when you guys are both sort of have your, mental faculties around you. Don't do this in the middle of the night. really set some rules and explain that this is not just about your child's sleep patterns, but it's also affecting you. And having someone awake in the middle of the night and sleeping during the day is really disruptive to the whole household. So while in your house, you know, your rules do apply. And again, trying to speak from a place of how it's not just affecting your child, but it's also affecting you, and that some ground rules for you to be able to maintain the peace in the household have to be met.
Great. Here's another question that's just come in. What's a good tech-free wind-down activity for teens? A tech-free wind-down activity.
Yeah, well, you know, just like all of us, I mean, I think that we forget that there was a time without technology, and, you know, things like reading books used to be, you know, much more prevalent before we substituted that with technology. And I think many of us, we are all, you know, to blame for that. And so, you know, reading books, doing a puzzle as a family. I mean, I think some families have noticed one of the small benefits of so much staying at home is things like, you know, doing puzzles have, you know, skyrocketed in terms of prevalence. I think that type of activity that's mentally stimulating but relaxing can be very good. Also, as a parent of a teenager, I think anything that you can do that actually engages your teenager is so important. They've got a lot going on in their lives, and they can be difficult, but they're really special human beings. And so finding ways to interact and engage in a way that's non-threatening to your teenager, that, you know, can let you just sort of be a human being, not always their parent, you know, just giving them rules, that you can find some enjoyable activities together. That's also a great sort of goal to have in mind with the wind down for teenagers, maybe even actually engaging with the family. So playing a board game, doing a puzzle, or, you know, having the teen read on their own. And again, the more that you model that as a parent, the more likely you are to have a teenager who will develop similar behaviors.
And what do you think about the idea? You mentioned reading, but what about letting kids read novels when they're in bed without using a screen? Is that a problem in terms of their timing of their bedtimes, or how do you suggest that they handle that?
You know, I think that it really depends on the child. For many people, reading, particularly if it's an actual book, not, you know, an ebook, that reading can be soporific. I mean, I think it depends on the teenager. You know, I think the biggest problem right now is so few teenagers are reading before bedtime. So I do think we have to get that habit back. If you happen to have a child or a teenager who is an avid reader, who gets like lost in a book, which is a wonderful thing, then maybe that wouldn't be the best strategy for them. Most teenagers I've seen, that is not the problem. You know, they do get lost in their phones, but getting lost in a book is generally not the problem that I'm seeing. Again, if you happen to have a teen who's such an avid reader, you might have to think about another activity, or to do the reading before getting into bed. But again, I don't see a whole lot of that.
Okay, and what do you suggest as a wind down activity for teens if they're not in the habit of reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, that's something to explore with your teenager. You can kind of talk about it. You can, you know, talk about what works for you, and sort of explore ideas if they're not a reader. And maybe they're not a novel reader, but maybe they would like to look at a magazine, or, you know, or if they're interested in playing a game or listening to music. And I would suggest that if they're going to do it on a device, that they do it outside of their room, and so that when they go to bed, you know, the bed is simply for sleep. I think it's really a kind of, it's an important exploration. And if you focus on it as this is about developing behaviors that will last a lifetime, you know, because many of us as adults, you know, in my insomnia practice, I often see that, you know, adults with insomnia, one of the challenges is we live in a culture where we race off to bed and we have forgotten how to wind down. So whether that means doing some, you know, yoga exercises, or breathing, or listening to music, or talking to somebody, socially engaging, that can also be calming. So there are activities, but we just need to be, I think, more effortful and more creative about it.
And one of the folks writing in and said, what about ebooks? And if I might jump in here, there are things that you can do to reduce the amount of blue enriched light that is emanating from the screens. You can reverse the color so that it's white letters on a black screen. You can use programs like f.lux as well as Night Shift on iPhones and things like that to eliminate some of the bluer colors on the screen and make them longer wavelength light. And also the third thing is to reduce the intensity of the light coming from the device. And all those things will help if you're using an ebook instead of a printed book. Then we have another question, Dr. Troxel, for you. My 16-year-old is battling anxiety and depression, but refuses to practice good, healthy habits like exercising daily, eating healthy meals, and disconnecting from devices so that they can keep a regular schedule. Some of it's attributable to her depression, but part of it is just her being rebellious. What do you suggest to help herself so that I, being the parent, am not constantly on her case, which causes more friction in our relationship?
Sure, yeah. Well, first, let me just say that there is a two-way street between sleep problems and mental health problems. Sleep problems are a symptom of virtually every known mental health problem, but sleep problems can also predict or exacerbate existing mental health problems. So being mindful and doing everything you can to support your teen's sleep is really important, particularly in this context. And I understand that it can be very difficult, and you want to not be in constant battle with your teenager. So I would really encourage you to, kind of set some ground rules and try to get your teenager engaged in making small steps to make a difference. And again, if you're working, if your teen is working with a therapist already, I think some of these things like creating a daily routine and sometimes deferring to a higher power and removing you as the parent. So if there is a therapist involved, I think that can be very useful. But so having that third party could be helpful. If not, just helping your teen to sort of understand that having routines is really important to support your mental health. And so it's not about you against her. It's really about doing what's best for her. Trying to make small steps to encourage some level of social engagement during the day, because that can make both sleep problems more likely as well as mental health problems exacerbated. Making sure that there's some sunlight exposure during the day, that she's getting out and that she's doing something. Too much time alone, socially isolated, and sedentary is only going to exacerbate her mental health issues as well as her sleep problems. And again, if you're struggling to manage it and you're not already engaged with a mental health provider, I would absolutely encourage that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Troxel. I really appreciate your participation in today's panel. We have more questions flooding in, but we need to move on to the next panelist. And if there's time at the end, we'll go back to some of these open questions. Our next panelist, Dr. Lauren Hale, is a professor of family, population, and preventive medicine at Stony Brook Medicine, and is an expert in the social patterns of sleep and how it contributes to a cycle of inequality in health and well-being. Dr. Hale is the founding editor-in-chief of the Sleep Health Journal and is the vice chair of the National Sleep Foundation. It's a pleasure to have you here, Lauren, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Seisler. A lot of what I'm going to say has been touched upon, and I only have about 10 minutes, but what I'm going to focus on is the relationship between sleep health and screens, with a few slides at the end addressing what we know about how sleep and screens have changed during COVID-19. So is this working? Huh. Okay. First, I want to acknowledge that I do receive some funding from NIH, and I'm affiliated as a volunteer with various nonprofits, the National Sleep Foundation, the Pajama Program, and of course, Children and Screens, which is the organizing body of this seminar. I also want to lend some credibility to what I know about COVID-19. I'm part of a 10-person team of what we call Nerdy Girls. We run a social media account called Dear Pandemic, where we help translate science about the pandemic for the greater good. And if you want to check us out, we're always producing good shareable information. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So hopefully the combination of my sleep research for the last 20 years, plus my COVID-19 equips me to answer some of your questions today. I also want to add credibility is that I'm also a parent of a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. I work full-time, and so does my partner. So I really understand and empathize with the challenges we are all experiencing right now. And honestly, you may hear my 5-year-old in the background singing to himself. This is just an extremely hard time. And screens and sleep are two of the activities that people are doing most during this time. So I'm glad you're logged in to hear us talk about it. So what do we know about screens and sleep? I started studying, deeply studying screens and sleep in 2015 when I was in, or actually 2014, when I was in the middle of collecting data, actigraphic data on almost 1,000 teens from 20 cities around the country. And one of my key research questions was understanding how screens, not just in the bedroom, but throughout the day, affected nighttime sleep. And as part of my preparation for analyzing that data, which I'll show you a little bit later, was conducting a systematic lit review. And at that point, my grad student and I identified about 70 papers. I think this was actually through 2014, but it was released in 2015, that had original research on this topic. Since then, the number of articles studying screens and sleep has doubled, if not tripled, because technology, this is a huge question. But the results, frankly, haven't changed that much. And I'm best at sharing the published paper, or I'm most comfortable sharing the published paper. So let me briefly summarize that out of the then 70 or so papers that we looked at, over 90% of them indicated a negative association between exposure to screen time, either during the day or in the hour or two before bedtime. There's not harmonization across studies on how screen time was measured, and a range of sleep outcomes. The most common aspects of sleep that are affected were later sleep onset, that means going to bed later, shorter sleep duration, meaning shorter nighttime sleep, and poorer sleep quality. And it's a dose-response relationship in any study that measured it that way. The more the more screen time you're exposed to over the course of the day, the later your bedtime. And it's not a huge number, but it's anywhere between 3 and 8 minutes per additional hour of screen time. So if you're looking at, for example, 5 hours of screen time exposure versus 1 hour, that's an 8-minute delay versus a 40-minute delay in bedtime. So it does add up, and 30 minutes of sleep less or later is certainly clinically relevant, and that's been shown in a number of the School Start Later papers showing that just getting teens to bed later, to sleep longer by 20 minutes, you see improvements in grades, reductions in car accidents, and other things. So what are the mechanisms? People always ask this question, and it's very complicated, but I'm going to focus on the 3 that we primarily have looked at in the literature. The first is time displacement. Time that you or your teen or your kid is on a screen is directly eating into time that they can be sleeping, especially with regard to sleep onset or bedtime. There is a reason why the CEO of Netflix has declared that one of its primary competitors is sleep. The CEO of Netflix is fighting against our human biology and need to sleep by making one episode transition seamlessly into the next episode without you even having to touch a button. That is the time displacement argument. The second argument is the psychological arousal. Exposure to screens, whether it's video games, television shows, movies, or social media is very psychologically arousing, and it works differently for different people. For your 12-year-old daughter, it might mean ruminating after looking on a social media account and seeing her 3 best friends out bowling, and she didn't even know that they were going. It is normal and natural to ruminate after social exclusion. And one way you can avoid that rumination, that will keep you up at night. And one way you can avoid that is by reducing the screen exposure, especially the social media exposure at night. Other ways that the psychological arousal can happen could be through emotional content, violent content that are often found in movies or video games. And so the third mechanism refers to the alerting effects of blue light that Dr. Czeisler and Dr. Troxel already spoke about. And this exposure to light suppresses your melatonin, which is sleep promoting. So we've got 3 things going on: time displacement, psychological arousal, and the physiological arousal. And all of them work against your body naturally falling asleep. Now, because science is iterative, I have to stay up on the literature. And last year, in part, in response to some of the work that myself and Monique LeBourgeois have done on screens and sleep, Common Sense Media asked a question about who is sleeping with screens next to their bed. Are they waking them up? And sure enough, they found among teens, 30% of teens report having a mobile device in or on their bed, which in itself, even if you don't use it, is a predictor of insufficient sleep. And 36% report that they wake up because their phone beeped or bleeped or somebody tweeted or they wanted to see what was going on at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning. And I looked at that when that came out and I was like, oh my gosh, our 3 mechanisms are incomplete. I had to go back and revise what our 3 mechanisms were. Our 4th one is also the actual awakening that occurs during the night because we sleep with these devices so close to us. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, sort of fly through this slide, although years of work went into it. Dr. Troxel pointed out there are a lot of reasons why our teens are not getting enough sleep. Screen time is part of a cluster of social and behavioral factors that we as parents and teenagers can modify. Caffeine consumption, schoolwork, extracurricular activities, all of those things work against our kids' sleep health. There's also the physiological phase delay, and then there's also the structural factors. This figure shows quite clearly, using actigraphic data, remember we looked at 1,000 teenagers from across the country, that the only teens who had enough time in bed to meet the minimum 8 to 10 hours were those who had high schools, this is the green dot in box, who had high schools that started at 8:30 in the morning or later. So this is an entirely different conversation about when high school should start for optimal sleep health, but it's actually pretty relevant to the current situation because we're in, maybe not as much anymore, but we're in a national shutdown where we don't have these constraints of needing to wake up by a certain time. It's not just even normal summer where there's camp or work. Things are different right now, and actually it's almost like we don't have school start times at the moment. Maybe things will resume or are starting to resume around the country. And here's a brief image from an important paper that Jean Twenge published in 2017 showing 2 national studies, and the bar for insufficient sleep here is 7 hours or less per night. Remember, Dr. Troxel said the consensus statement recommends 8 to 10 hours, so this is 7 or fewer. As you can see, there's been a slight shift upward in the percentage of teens in the US who are not getting the sleep they need, and especially went up around 2012. And Dr. Twenge's work looked at the range of possibilities that could be predicting this change. And what she found is similar to something somebody mentioned in the chat room earlier, is that the kids are sleeping with their smartphones. Look at this picture of my good friend's nephew. Here he is, he's surrounded by technology in the middle of the day, and he's got the death grip on his smartphone. You know, he can't get rid of his phone. He's holding on to his phone. And what happened in 2012, according to Twang's work, is that was when cell phones really became pervasive amongst everyone, including teenagers. It became expected that everybody have their phone, and they're bringing them to bed. So let's briefly summarize some recent findings of what do we know about sleep during COVID-19. For better or worse, I had a study with my colleagues at Emory in Barrow County, Georgia, where we collected data at 2 high schools during the first week in March. It was self-reported data, and then we went back to them in May. 761 students, reasonable representation of these 2 semi-rural school districts, semi-rural schools in a district. And what we found, and mind you, self-reported sleep is usually an overestimate of actual sleep, but during early March, before there were COVID lockdowns and before many people were thinking about it, especially teenagers in Georgia, these students reported 7.5 and 7.8 hours per night, respectively. After the lockdowns, about 6 weeks later, each of those high schools experienced an average of 1.1 hour increase in sleep. So actually, from a sleep health perspective, with the removal of the early morning constraint, we're seeing increases in sleep duration. But it's not as positive as I would like, because we're also seeing big shifts in timing. Bedtime, the median bedtime shifted from about 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and the waking up shifted from 5:45, which that is way too early, to about 10 a.m. So we see more sleep overall, later shifts in timing, and slight increases in insomnia symptoms and napping behaviors. And this is consistent with 2 studies that I'm aware of in adults, actually 3 studies. Fitbit data, Dr. Robbins has some data also from a wearable device showing that adults are sleeping a little bit longer, not an hour longer, but about 25 minutes longer. And just last week, a study came out showing increases in sleep problems among adults. So teens are more or less parroting what's happening in adults, but maybe to a bigger degree in terms of delay and addition of sleep hour. I'd like to say they're maybe catching up. So a lot of this has already been mentioned by the prior speakers. Encourage a family bedtime routine, role model it, don't have electronic media in that routine. Charge your devices in a different room. As you can see, I've got a little sleeping bed and a little sleeping bag down at the bottom. We have that, it's in our kitchen. The one area that I didn't hear is many people talk about is that I don't want you to underestimate your kids. Your kids understand stuff, and you can talk with them about why you have your rules. And you could say, you know, in my case, I say, Mommy studies sleep. I want to tell you why we take the devices away at 7:30. You know, I have to confess that shifted over COVID, but you know, this is how you get kids to willingly cooperate with your rules, and kids can understand that and work with them to get the results you want. So I think I'm going to stop there. And
thank you so much, Lauren. We really appreciate it. We have time for a couple of questions. And so the first one is going to be, how do you suggest provide support to parents who are struggling with their child's sleep impacted by screens late at night?
I know, it's hard. This goes back to many of the tips that Wendy had advised to some of those parents who ask questions, is work with your kids to find alternatives. It is not enough to just grab the phones and hide them in a box. You really need to say, let's figure out a routine that's going to work with you. Maybe reading's not your thing, but maybe we could go for an evening stroll or have tea outside or do something where you can be emotionally available and open to a calming bedtime routine that isn't involving screens. I know this is hard. I am not an expert at it, but I think you need to work with them in a way that helps them find something else they can do.
Okay, great. Now, here we have a paradoxical situation in which elementary education, middle school, many schools are going virtual. And can you speak specifically to the effects of all of that screen time on 5 to 12-year-olds? And then at the same time, address the question of whether there's research on the impact of screen times at different times of day or night on young children's sleep. In other words, does it matter when you're exposed to the screens?
I'll start with that one because I have more confidence in my answer on that one. Unfortunately, a lot of the research on screens and sleep has not to date adequately differentiated the timing of when screen exposure occurs. So you can't always say that, oh, daytime screen time doesn't affect sleep. And there's reasonable assumption that most screen exposure doesn't happen during the daytime because they've been in school. So when is it happening? Of course, it's happening after they come home from school. There are, of course, some kids who get their screen time in the morning, but a lot of it's happening at night. And that's basically what the data have been indicating, that any amount of screen time is during the day is affecting increased later bedtimes, basically. But now that we have this extended period with a lot of kids not in school, we might be able to have better data on if you have it early in the day, it's not as bad. I tend to believe that, for theoretical reasons, we would think, pushing back the bedtime, the light exposure at night, that's all things, time displacement, and those are things where you think screens closer to bedtime are worse for your sleep than screens during the day. But
all right.
If you're doing screens all day, then yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Hale. We need to move on to
Sorry.
Dr. Robbins, and then if there's time at the end, we'll get back to more questions. So, Dr. Robbins, I've already introduced you, and we want to hear how did everyone do on those quizzes, and related to the myths, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Seisler. All right, so the results are in. I've been busily putting the results together, tabulating some of your responses to the quiz earlier on, and most of you did pick up that these are in fact myths. These are incorrect statements. So what you're seeing here on my screen are your responses. The correct response, which was marking false to some of these statements that we quizzed you on earlier. So we're going to go through each of these, debunk them, and do so quickly so we can get to a couple more questions. And I welcome input from all of my collaborators on the call. Now, number one, heavy and loud snoring from my child means they are deeply asleep. 88% of you correctly reported that this is a myth. That is not true. Heavy and loud snoring is not an ideal scenario. It's one of the most common symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea, which is a concerning sleep disorder, which is actually relatively common among children. And one other additional symptom to look for if you're thinking your child might be a candidate for that disorder is excessive daytime sleepiness. But independent of obstructive sleep apnea, loud snoring is also associated with adverse outcomes. So it might be something to talk to your healthcare provider, not in fact a statement that your child is sleeping deeply. Now, number two, 58% of you correctly reported false to this myth. Experiencing a night terror is a traumatic event for my child. Now, this is false. A night terror occurs occasionally in children, and it is a component of these occurrences happen in largely non-REM sleep, and it's a demonstration of a real severe fear and concerning behavior from your child, but it is actually an event that's not at all remembered by your child. So it is not traumatic for them, although it may be traumatic for the parent. Number 3, on the child sleep myth, 78% of you got this correct and said that this statement is indeed a myth, and that's that my child's bedtime, if I move it later, they will just wake up later. And this is a myth. If we put our children to bed a little bit later, they will simply wake up at the normal time, very much creatures of habit. So the best thing would be, as all presenters have discussed, bedtime routine and consistent sleep schedule, because the later bedtime will just be associated with shorter sleep duration. Number 4, 70% of you reported that this is indeed false. Melatonin statement, melatonin is safe for my child because it is natural. Now, we are seeing surprising reports of the proportion of children who are being given melatonin supplements. Of course, melatonin naturally occurring is a hormone in the brain that's associated with sleep regulation. But when you take it in pill form, a couple things. Number 1, we don't always know its purity. There have been some studies to show that when you see melatonin labeled as such at the grocery store or the drugstore, that when we look scientifically at the components of those substances, that it's not fully melatonin. In fact, it's much less melatonin than is on the label. In addition, melatonin, we do see in animal research, has some pretty concerning outcomes in terms of adverse impacts on reproductive organs, for instance. So we don't know its purity or its long-term implications, and the best strategies are the behavioral tips and strategies that we've gone through today. Number 5, 54% of you did correctly pick up that this is a false statement, that the statement that is kids who are good sleepers will sleep through the night. Now, we'll distinguish here between an awakening where your child is up and running around the house, and a short arousal. An arousal from sleep happens on average, research shows among children between ages 2 and 9, on average about twice an hour, so quite frequently. And so therefore, awakenings or brief arousals from sleep are quite developmentally normal. But as your child goes through those bouts where they might experience awakenings, all of the tips and strategies that have been shared so far, soothing them back to sleep, coming back to that relaxing bedtime routines. I'd just love to open up to my colleagues if anyone else has any other comments to add before we go over to the teenager sleep myths. Okay, just in the interest of time, moving right along. And here, perhaps Dr. Troxel, I could pass it over. I think this was a myth that came from you, and 50% of the audience correctly said that technology is the main reason teachers can't go to sleep at a reasonable time. 50% of you reported that that statement is false. Would anyone else, any of my colleagues, like to take this? Or you all certainly now know after the presentation that technology is one of the factors, but teens are really fighting their physiology when it comes to good sleep. Now, number 2, if teens sleep later, or excuse me, if school start later, teens will just stay up later. And this is a false statement, and 66% of you correctly noted that this is false. That if maybe I could pass this over to you, Dr. Troxel, to take this one.
Oh, happily, and I am happy to see that 2/3 correctly identified this as a myth. We actually have substantial research showing that when schools start later, kids actually do get more sleep. Their bedtimes stay roughly the same, but their wake-up times get extended, resulting in more sleep. And again, this relates to some of the work that Dr. Hale just presented, that, one of the potential, benefits of the stay-at-home orders and the changes in school schedules has been that we are seeing that teens are getting more sleep when the constraint of early school start times is removed. The problem is now that their schedules are just so erratic. But school start times are a major constraint to teens getting the adequate sleep they need, and studies have shown this.
Terrific. And the third sleep myth for teens is we are coddling our teens by letting them sleep in. 86% correctly noted this as a myth. Do you also want to take this one, Dr. Troxel?
Happily, I like to say that, this is the same thing as if you would say, my 2-year-old, if a 2-year-old we know needs a nap, and we would never say, to a parent of a 2-year-old, don't let Johnny nap because then he won't be ready for kindergarten when he can't take a nap. When we have this myth that by letting teenagers get the sleep they need, we're coddling them or not preparing them for the real world. It's that same, misconception. By allowing our teenagers to get the sleep they need, far from coddling them, we're actually just supporting their healthy brain and physical and emotional development to make them stronger, more resilient adults.
Terrific. And next, teens who fall asleep in class are lazy. Exciting to see 98% correctly refuted this statement as a myth. For all the reasons you've all now heard on the webinar, teens are just fighting against their physiology to get good sleep during these years. And when that's compounded with an early school start time and a later school, bedtime preference, that leaves very little time for sleep, resulting in significant daytime sleepiness. So this is kind of an artifact of those barriers that teens face when it comes to their sleep, and not that they are lazy. Last but not least, teenagers have little control over their sleep. Dr. Truxell, would you like to take this one?
That's a tough one, honestly, because I do think we put teenagers in a rough spot. The fact is that teenagers don't control their biology. They also don't control school start times. Though we as families and communities can, and I believe should, encourage school districts to consider later school start times, because the evidence does show that later school start times do help to support teen sleep. There are certainly factors that teens do control and parents can also support in their own families, like all the tips we discussed in terms of curbing technology use at bedtime, managing light exposure, having a wind down team, and having a consistent sleep-wake routine. But it's not all in their control, particularly when we have these policy level influences that are constraining their opportunity for sleep.
I will go ahead and stop my screen share, and Dr. Czeisler, pass it back to you in case there are any other questions to close out the webinar on the myths or anything else.
Well, I would like to, at this point, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, Rebecca. I'd like to pass the baton to Dr. Pamela Hertz Della Pietra.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you all for coming and participating in such an informative and engaging conversation. Also, thanks to our wonderful panelists, Kim, Wendy, Lauren, and Rebecca, for sharing your insights and expertise. We invite you to share the YouTube video you'll receive of today's workshop with your fellow parents, teachers, clinicians, researchers, and friends. Our discussions about digital media use and children's well-being will continue throughout the summer with weekly Wednesday workshops. Next Wednesday's workshop, August 19th, Fact or Fake, focuses on misinformation and how to spot it. On Wednesday, August 26th, we will host a conversation to answer the question, schools back, now what? We know both of these topics are especially important right now and hope you'll join us to hear what the experts have to say. When you leave the workshop, you'll see a link to a short survey. Please click on the link and let us know what you thought of today's workshop. Thanks again, and everyone, be safe and well.
Thank you for organizing this, Pamela. We really appreciate it, and for leading the Children and Screens effort. It's really been a fantastic journey, and we appreciate it, and thank all the panelists as well.
Thank you.